Good afternoon, Mike. We are now live. I'll go ahead and press record if you're ready.
Thank you. Who are we waiting for, Yvonne?
Yes, I believe so, Mike.
And is Sunny on?
Let's
So-
do the,
I think it's Yvonne and Sunny.
I'll text them.
okay. All set. Here we go. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And we are recording. This is the Public Safety and Justice Affairs Committee meeting. It's Tuesday, June 29th. Welcome one and all. Roll call, please.
Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher,
Yes, here.
Ms. Conwell,
Present.
Mr. Tuma,
Here.
Mr. Jones,
Here.
Ms. Simon.
Here.
There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that council members Miller and Baker are in attendance.
Welcome, Mr. Miller and Ms. Baker. Committee, in your packet, you have the minutes of the June 1st meeting. If they're in order, I'll accept the motion and a second.
So moved.
Second, Conwell.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Here's what we'll do today, and I'm assuming everybody got their booklet delivered to their residence or they picked it up downtown. That's only for reference, so it wasn't intended that you read it before today's committee meeting. As Jeff goes through, he'll refer to various pages from my understanding, so you can refer to that. What we'll do is we'll go as long as we can, close to 3 o'clock. If we get close to 3 o'clock, we'll take a break from this portion, deal with the legislation that's in front of us. I think at that time, we'll have sufficient information to make a decision on if you want to move forward on the criteria architect. What we'll do is give Jeff all the leeway that we can. I would ask that you hold your questions. There's going to be a lot of information, and I know you're going to have some questions. If you could just jot those down and we could go back and reference those at the end. If we do get to a point where people have to leave, what we'll do is we'll make Jeff available for any private discussions you might want to have regarding this, and he can answer any of those questions. If necessary, we'll come back into committee at a later date to finish this up, but I think 2 hours should suffice in giving you an idea of not just the work and effort that's been put in, but how we got to where we got to. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. Jeff?
Okay, and I'm going to share my screen here. Hold on one second, please. Hold on just one second. I'm having a little bit of a I don't know why my slideshow is not starting. No, that's great. Just one second. Seems to be frozen. I apologize. Give me 1 second, Mike. I don't know why this froze up, but it just did. It was all set up and it just froze. I gotta start it again.
Okay, not a problem.
Hi, Mike. While Jeff is doing that, do you want me to just go ahead and read the item into the record?
Yeah, go ahead.
Resolution number 2021-0157, making an award on requisition number 5580 to Helmuth, Obata, and Casabon, PC, in the amount not to exceed $8 million for Criteria Architectural Services for the Cuyahoga County Correction Center project for the period 7/6/2021 through 12/31/2025.
Thank you.
Mike, can you confirm that you guys are seeing the screen now?
I do.
Okay. Okay, and I apologize for that. So I'm going to walk through a relatively fast-paced presentation that really takes you through what we have been doing on the Justice Center project. Some of this will be a repeat for some of you of a few things you've seen. All of the information I'm going to give to you is available, or I'll just say virtually all of it is available in the public record. It's all on the website. It's taken from the various presentations that we have made, and I have given you a book. It doesn't have every presentation that we've done, but it has, I think, 10 of them that has a lot of the information, and you'll see references in here to much of that. So the background for this, we're going to do a brief background. I'm going to go through, and although we're going to focus more on the jails, I do have to tell you about what's going on with the courts. We're going to talk about quickly what we're doing with the court assessment, the jail assessment, review the alternatives that we have all considered as a steering committee for 2 years, tell you the approach we've selected and why, talk about next steps, and then leave it up to Matt and Mike, I think, to talk about the criteria architect selection. So just by way of background, and I know that you all know this, but just to be very quick about it, we have our Justice Center built in '76. It included Jail 1, the police administration building, in the courts. At that time, there were 956 beds in Jail 1. By 1995, we did Jail 2 with 480 beds. A significant amount of money was then spent to modify and actually get some double occupancy in cells and get up to 1765 rated capacity. Not ideal way to have 1765, but that was the rated capacity. The courts that we're talking about, there are really 2 courts that are taken care of in the Justice Center, and a 3rd court that we are concerned with that is in the old courthouse. So we have the Common Police Court with 35 courtrooms. We have the Municipal Court and the Housing Court, 17 courtrooms. And then these 2 courts also share, have courtrooms in the old courthouse. The Common Police Court has 6 courts in the old courthouse. The Domestic Relations Court has 6 courts in the old courthouse. Now, there are 2 other courts located in the old courthouse, the Probate Court and the Court of Appeals. And although we have considered them from time to time, and we've done some analysis, we even did an evaluation of the old courthouse, right now they are not specifically part of the program we're looking at. We're keeping them involved, but our focus on the court side is on 3 courts: the Common Police Court, the Municipal Court, and the Domestic Relations Court. So what happened, basically, there were a lot of issues with the building that everyone knows about. In 2013, there was a facilities assessment done. It basically showed that the cost to fix what is broken in those buildings at that time was about 50% of the asset value of the complex. And that was without making any programmatic changes. It was not even bringing everything necessarily up to every code requirement or every obligation for operation. In 2014, that was followed by a planning report that looked at 6 different ways to possibly renovate. Once again, the cost, and this is just to fix things, not to reprogram, not necessarily to get everything compliant, but the cost at that time had ranges from $300 million to $428. Of course, those costs all basically have increased by about 4 to 6% per year. And right now, I think you all know that in the construction area, our costs are probably beyond that. We are having outrageous increases, which I hope is temporary in all construction costs. One of the key things about this report, though, was that, and by the way, the cost of a new build wasn't known, but one of the key things about the report is it did predict that for any planning, we have to assume a jail population of at least 2,600 by 2030, based on the past experience of what had occurred before that date. So what then happens, just very quickly, is from 2014 to 2016, there's a series of visioning workshops. Representatives of the county, the courts, and others got together to just try to get to work together to figure out how to approach this. There were guiding principles that were developed, and a project was essentially announced. In 2018, that's when I got involved as the owner's rep. But at that very same time, from 2018 to 2019, the parties determined that they had to have a better working relationship. And they spent about a year working out a memorandum of understanding, which was a decision-making process for all the stakeholders involved. In 2019, an agreement was signed that created that steering committee that you see on the right hand of the screen. And it also created a decision-making process. All critical decisions would have to be made in a public session after public presentations by this committee, and everything had to be done by a 10 votes to the positive. If there were 3 no votes, we couldn't move on. That was a no. So we had to get a supermajority on every critical decision, which meant that we had to build consensus on everything we were doing. In 2019, in March 2019, and by the way, in January, we put out RFQs. We retained we went through our process to get our programming consultants, and these are our national experts on jail programming. I should say on justice programming, including court programming, jail programming, and detention statistics and projections. They were selected in March of 2019. And from 2019 to the present, we have been involved in intensive assessment exercises in the development of options. I will point out that we've had 13 public steering committee meetings. And I think I mentioned to some folks, I did an estimate the other day. I was just guessing that we had about 450 working group sessions. We actually went back and counted them up. And we have had 628 working group sessions, different combinations of people involved in the courts, in staffing, with different combinations of my group and of our programming group. You can see on the right some of the different types of steering committee or of working group meetings we've had, but that shows you the intensity of the work and the volume of information and meetings that took place over 2 years. So let me begin, and I'm going to just very quickly talk about court assessment. My focus is really not on the courts today. We have more work to do there. But when you assess the courts, of course, you're not just talking about the courts. You're also talking about all of those entities that serve the courts, including such entities as the prosecutor, the public defender, the clerk of courts, and everybody else involved in the process. But generally speaking, when you're looking at a court project, the key driver is the number of judicial officers to be served, because with every judicial officer comes whatever litigation space they need and whatever staff they need. And that's what you have to account for. So what happened in this process, very early on, there was an assessment of current requirements. What do the buildings have right now that has to be replaced or dealt with? And what you see there is simply a listing of all the entities that are served in the court. And now not all entities that are tied to the court necessarily have their facilities in the court. Some of them have some space in the jail. At the time we did this, there was some space in the PAB, most of the space in the courts tower, some space in the historic courthouse, and even in Courthouse Square. The key is this was the amount of square footage that we had to look at, and importantly, the number of courtrooms that we were dealing with, and it's the same number I showed you before, 52 in the courts tower and 12 in the historic courthouse, 64 courtrooms at that point in time that we were dealing with. So we turned to our consultants because we not only have to predict our current needs, but future needs. And they started down the path of doing a traditional needs assessment. And to do that, you look at current requirements and you look at future trends. Well, there's three things that are typically looked at, or two things that are looked at when you try to determine trends for a courthouse. Number one, what is the population trend in the area you're serving? What has it been for the last 10 years, 15 years? What do you predict for the future? Because generally that's some indication of the amount of business you're going to have to take care of. Well, and you can take a look in the information we provided, but we know that the population trend has historically been down in Cuyahoga County. And while we all hope that it's stabilized, if you take a look at the actual sources that report on this, they are saying hopefully you stabilize, but they don't see growth. That is for sure. The second thing you look at are court filings. What is the history of court filings? How busy are the courts? Where have they been? Where are they going to go? And once again, you can look at the common police court, you can look at the municipal court, and you can look at the meeting minutes and the information that was adduced. Court filings, though, are down, and that is in your book. But there's a third factor here, and that is, what is the number of judicial officers to be served? And in this one, we have a constraint that we have to be agnostic about and we cannot deal with. And that is that the county and even the courts here have nothing to say about the number of judges that are served. The number of judges is constrained by state law. The state legislature sets the number of judges in Cuyahoga County. It's a decision of the legislature based upon the recommendation of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And that is an assumption. That's not just an assumption. That is a fact that we have to deal with. So when we talk about the courts, we have to take a look at the existing number of judges, and we have to take a look at a future projection, but that projection is constrained. So while we think that there can be a reduction in the number of magistrates, we cannot reduce for this analysis the number of judges, and that is a factor that continues with this analysis. We don't increase them, we don't decrease them. We have to keep them stable because we have no control over that number, and we're agnostic about that number. We have to plan for it. Now, we possibly could do a facility that has some flexibility, but that's a discussion. That's a different discussion. The other thing that we're constrained by in all this is what are called the Supreme Court's rules of superintendence. And what you see on the right is Appendix D to the rules of superintendence of the Supreme Court. And these rules have been around for a long time, but right now they are rules. And what they say is, and I've put a few things in yellow, that every trial judge should have a separate courtroom, his or her own courtroom. Every courtroom has an elevated bench, but every courtroom is a jury-enabled courtroom. Every courtroom has a jury box. And of course, if you have both criminal and civil trials, that means that every courtroom has to have a criminal jury-enabled courtroom. These rules are kind of old. They say some other things too. They say that every room should have a blackboard, which we do not intend to put in these rooms, by the way. But the point to be made here is right now, this is a constraint. Typically, in this day and age, in other jurisdictions that have faced these issues, we do get into issues of having multi courtrooms, some form of potential sharing. Not every judge has to have a jury courtroom, and it may be that these can be modified at some point if we come to agreement on what to do in the future. But right now, this is a constraint for planning, and I just want to point that out. The rules of the road as we have right now. I'm going to skip over the courts right now because there's a lot more to be said about that, but I want to get into the jail assessment because that's a little bit more critical to what we're talking about right now. So for jail assessment, the key driver is the predicted population in the future of that jail by category of need. So you have to think about not only what do you predict, who do you predict might be in that jail, but what are their specific needs groups, male or female? Do they have do they have serious mental illness? Do they have other medical needs, each of which might be involved with a different kind of setting and a different area of the jail that do not mix? So you have to think about the population and category of need. So we did, our consultants came in and did a lot of sophisticated analysis. And what do you look at when you do this assessment? Well, the first thing you look at are what you have, the total beds. And as I mentioned before, we have a rated capacity of 1765 beds. Now, whether or not those are good beds, whether those are good conditions to be in or bad, that's another story, but we have those beds. Within that, we have 116 mental health beds and 151 medical beds. Then there's the question, is that adequate? And should that be the ratio going forward? That had to be studied. Now, in talking about future jail population, we have to assess what would we have to either have a renovated facility or a new built facility to take care of. And keep in mind, once again, that the 2014 assessment said we needed to build for 2,600. Well, we did very, very detailed analysis because, overbuilding a jail is an extraordinarily expensive proposition, and it is probably not a best practice in any sense. So what was looked at here? First of all, you have to look at population. And of course, we know that our population in Cuyahoga County has generally declined. And we looked at the information, and while once again, we hope that our decline has stabilized and maybe we'll have future growth, that is not something we can count on. And if you look at all the official sources, they do project either future decline or no growth. I like to disagree with that, but my opinion doesn't matter. You have to take a look at the sources that you have on this. Number two, we know that the crime rate has declined. Between 2008 and 2017, the crime rate, both for Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, and the state of Ohio and the United States, has actually declined. Number three, the arrest rate has declined. Here we have a little bit of a challenge because we actually don't have countywide arrest records, which came as a surprise to both our consultants and me, but we were able to cobble together information to determine that our arrest rate has in fact declined over the roughly 10 years before this occurred. The numbers on probation has declined. It's declined actually by about 20% in that time frame. But despite all those declines, here's what we learned. The average daily population in the jail had actually gone up over 15.5% over 11-year period. We found that the average monthly admissions had actually increased by 30% over the 11-year period. In fact, from 16 to 19 alone, it had gone up by 34%. And we found that our incarceration rate is actually higher than the relevant peer group communities. Our incarceration rate is about 1.76% of the population in Cuyahoga County. That's 23% higher than taking the average of all the numbers that you see on the right-hand side in our peer group. And, some of these are surprising. I mean, Wayne County, Detroit 9.96, Milwaukee 0.93, Cook County 1.13, Franklin 1.54, Summit 1.24. So we knew that while all these numbers up here are going down, our incarceration and who's in that jail was going up. So the question was, what is a reasonable future projection? What should we think about? How do we graph this? What's going to happen? So our consultants came in and they actually developed 4 projections, really 3 factual projections. They said, you can take different points on this curve and make different assumptions, and you can have a high growth, a moderate growth, or a low growth belief, and based on doing statistical analysis of history. And by the way, the moderate growth or mediate growth is sort of consistent right here after, in 2032 with what we actually saw in 2014. But the point is, with each one of these, you are ultimately, especially if you're building out for something that lasts into 2040, you're building a very large jail. And this was questioned by our consultants and everybody else. Do we want to be building this big a jail? Other people who have done this recently have determined that it is not a good idea, that population management is a much better idea for a whole lot of reasons. So, and then an analysis was done as to why we had such a large population. And I'm coming back to that in a minute, because the determination was that we can greatly and effectively reduce our jail population. So we then went into a series of projections. And we said, okay, let's assume we change something about our system. Let's do things differently. Let's enact diversion. Let's get better on early release, on release on recognizance and bail reform and central booking and everything else. And then we went through the process of saying, what if we did that? Could we reduce these projections by 10%, 15%, 20%? And we went through a whole series of studies and information about how it could work. Now, of course, what's the importance of reducing jail population? Well, I don't need to lecture the people here. You all know better than I about all the issues you face every day, the human cost of having too many people and the wrong people in jail. But just from the point of view of an operational and construction cost. And these numbers actually now look higher. These were the early estimates that we did or that were done by our consultants. But just one additional bed in that jail that you have to build out for someone who occupies it and you have to operate per bed, the cost per bed is about $232,000 in project cost and development cost. If you can cut out 25 beds, you're cutting out $5.8 million from what you would have otherwise done. But what's more important are the operating costs. Annual operating cost per bed, about $45,000. For 25 beds per year, that's over $1 million. And over the course of 30 years per bed, it's over $1 million. And for 25 beds, it's $33 million. And we're talking about the difference between maybe building a jail that can house 2,600 versus getting down to housing units, at least that are at 1,600. So these are enormous numbers we're talking about if we can do something about our jail population, put aside the human cost involved. So with this information, our consultants looked at all of the things that were driving jail population. And I'm not going to spend the time going through these right now, in detail, but, we didn't have central booking. We didn't have comprehensive pre-screening services that validated risk assessment for early release, although the city was actually doing better on this. We have all of the issues with bond reform, multiple jurisdictions setting bond at different levels, and issues with, what is appropriate levels. A huge number of people who are in jail just for violation of probation. Technical issues, not new offenses, 8 to 10%. Are there different ways to deal with this? Ankle bracelets, et cetera, but don't put them in a jail population. We have an issue with homeless population that ends up being incarcerated because there's no better option. We had a big issue, time lapse between jail admission and release on bond, because we don't have a jail expediter. People would get lost in that jail. They would be released on bond, but at least at the time we looked at it, it took days before they actually were released from the jail. A high percentage of people that could not make a small amount of bail, which, everyone knows that issue. And simply a lack of approach to jail population management, no expediter or client advocate whose job it is to manage that population. Obviously, the increase in opioid and heroin addiction had something to do with this. The insufficient mental health and substance abuse treatment available in jail. I mean, here's something that was pretty interesting. Those with serious mental health issues that are incarcerated, their average stay in jail was 4 times longer than everybody else. If you had a mental health issue, and your primary issue is really mental health issues, not crime, but once you get incarcerated, you're there 4 times longer than an individual that isn't. And, what does that mean? What should we be doing? Because there's a huge cost and expense, both from the human point of view and just cost from doing that. I'm not going to go through the rest of these factors, but there's a series of them that relate to bail reform and things that can be satisfied with diversion and other options. So when this was all done, we came up with a series of steps that we think have to be taken care of. And some of these you have seen we're in various, you are in various stages of doing these. One, comprehensive integrated jail management and information system. That's an ongoing issue that has to be addressed. The jail population management plan with an expediter is a issue that is in the process but needs to be addressed. You've heard a lot now about what's been happening with diversion. You have seen separately that we did break off from this process, and one of our consultants, Curtis Pulitzer, went and worked very hard with everybody to create the diversion off ramps to develop mental health diversion capacity. We think initially, as that is done, it's going to initially, reduce that jail population by 150 to 200. It could do more ultimately. and central booking has a big role. And you know that we're doing interim central booking to start that off. Others are also still involved with pretrial screening and services for all courts. The city is doing that. That's an issue for everyone else to continue to work on, along with comprehensive bail reform. So with those strategies, what happened was the steering committee determined by 12-0 vote that all those strategies have to be supported. They gave their view as to how much time and effort needed to be put into those commitments to make those happen, with the understanding that reducing jail population is critical. And with that in mind, we got to a number that you'll see. And the idea was, it is possible that all this doesn't work. It is possible that we're still going to need a jail that has to satisfy upwards of 2,400. But the idea would be to see if we can't, and even if we have to build out or renovate a core facility to do that, let's target 1,600 in terms of our housing unit. Let's try to find flexibility if we have to move upwards or downwards. But if we could get that housing units down to 1,600, we save an enormous amount of time, operational cost, improve the human condition greatly, but still have flexibility if we have to grow. So one thing I want to point out here, some have suggested that this whole effort is the idea of some people who want to build a big jail. That is not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make this jail as small as possible and to get other services to take care of the true needs and improve everything that way. And obviously, there was a recognition by the steering committee that these are bold initiatives. But once again, we have to continue to monitor this, which we will during design. If we have to move the number of beds upward, we can. We will have flexibility, but the goal is not to have to do that. So with this in mind now, we went forward and we started to develop and look at alternative approaches for how to address the justice system. And once again, and I won't go, we have lots of detail, here's what we said in the courts we had to address. Here's what we said we had to address with respect to detention, the number of beds, direct supervision, countywide central booking, enhanced medical and mental health services. And then also we had the sheriff's administration that we had to address. These are the things that we had to build out for. So in broad terms, what was developed over the course of 2 years were 3 major alternatives, types of ways to address these issues. And they range from everywhere from renovating everything on that site and studying that to moving everything off the site and building everything new. So we looked at every single option you could imagine, from a total renovation of everything on site to a total build new of everything off site, and then all the options in between. And to divide them up, we looked at, in that first group, we studied 4 different options for expanding, renovating, or replacing everything in place. We looked at 2 options for relocating the jail to a new site, but renovating or replacing the courts in place. And we looked at 3 options for new jail and new court facilities offsite in a variety of configurations. So this basically was looking at 9 separate options, each one of which were preliminary designed or programmed, each one of which were costed, each one of which we looked at operation costs, we looked at the practical issues, and we presented those. Now, I will also tell you that even though we started with 9, we were then asked to look at many permutations on those 9. And I'll talk about some of them. So this continued to develop, and really there was no stone unturned with this. So let me start out with common elements to all of these. The one thing that's common about all of these was the decision that Jail 1 could not be preserved. It had to be replaced. It was operationally inefficient. There was excessive inmate movement. You could not do it efficiently or effectively. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. But, we've taken a look at calculating if we simply replace Jail 1 with something that was completely efficient, what would the operational savings be? Now, there is a detailed report that shows the annual savings that you could gain at about $19.3 million per year. It's a detailed report. There are some other ways of looking at this, and it's still being completely evaluated. But even if you reevaluated this in ways that are possible, I don't believe you're going to get to a value under any circumstance that's less than a savings of $15 million per year. And we can talk about that in more detail. We can talk through the studies and the assumptions, but it is a significant operational savings to replace the jails. And most of these savings comes from jail 1. Some does come from jail 2. But jail 1 also, the physical condition, it's just cost prohibitive to fix, especially to bring everything up to standards that they need to be brought to. There's lack of program space on the housing floors, lack of facilities that you need for attorney and family visiting, lack of space and access for community-based organizations, inadequate support functions. The intake and central booking function, the ability to do it there is pretty much non-existent. It just is impossible really to do anything effective with jail 1. Even if we kept jail 2, which is in better condition, we could try to do that, but major renovations would still be required and had to be accounted for. So that's one assumption. And by the way, some of you have seen this briefly, but just to talk about what I mean on jail 1, that is the footprint of jail 1. And you can see that these units, it's direct supervision, but they were designed with 24 cells that could accommodate up to 28 beds. But every time, and that means that someone has to be direct supervision every shift, day and night. So that individual's there, but every time anyone goes anywhere for anything, they have to be accompanied. They have to be escorted to recreation. They have to be escorted to any visiting, whether they're attorney or family. They have to be escorted to medical, you name it. So you have a lot of people that have to stay in place to watch this, and you're escorting everybody all the time, which also has safety concerns and security concerns, and it's just problematic. By contrast, a new facility or a modern facility, the housing unit has everything right there. First of all, the unit would be doubled in size, and you can easily do direct supervision like you see here with 48, not 24. So you're having your staff need. Also with electronics, you can do it more effectively, but they look right into recreation. You don't have to escort someone to recreation. They can walk right out into recreation. And all these other things that you need to go to that I talked about are right there. They can go right to these different functions, and you don't have to escort them through the building. There's a lot of discussion about that, but suffice it to say, there's huge savings if you don't do it this way and don't do what you have in jail 1. There are additional common elements to all preliminary alternatives. Sheriff's administration functions are considered part of the jail siting. And there's just a lot of other things that we talked about, but in every case, and obviously parking has to be there, but in every case, population management with emphasis on diversion is critical to every option. So once again, we looked at 3 potential groups of options. The first group, expanding, renovating, or replacing a consolidated justice center in place. And we looked at 4 versions of that. And here's what they were, and I'll show them to you. Maximum reuse, where we have limited court consolidation, maximum reuse with complete court consolidation, including what is in the old courthouse for domestic relations, partial reuse and full replacement. So here's what you have to think about. So if you were to do this, so number 1, we know you can't use jail 1, but we also know that you can't just take 900 people out of that jail while you demolish it. So the first thing you have to do is you have to build a new jail 1 to replace it. That box represents the mass in a proper facility that has the things that you really need, better daylight for recreation. That represents the mass of the building you would have to build. And what this shows here is obviously we'd want it connected. So it'd have to be on an adjacent site. So that gets into the issue of what site is really available, how much would it cost, can you really get it? You can use eminent domain, and is it really the right thing to do? But putting that aside, what you'd have to do is you'd have to build the new jail 1, connect it to jail 2. Then what you would do is you demolish jail 1, but now you have to construct a building here, which is swing space, because if you renovate in here, You need a place for judges to go while you're renovating many floors, and you also need additional space. So that would be the next part. And once you have this swing space here, now you can start a phased renovation of these facilities and bring them up to speed. The bottom line in doing that is it's extremely expensive way to go. It takes a very, very long time to get that done. It would take, close to a decade to put all those pieces in place and get them done. And yes, you would have connection, and it would also be very disruptive. And at the end of the day, you'd still end up with jail 2, which doesn't function that well, and you still end up with a high-rise jail, which is not efficient to operate. The folks that operate your jail do not like elevators. They do not like verticality. They like things horizontal, and it's a very expensive proposition to do. So this was looked at in a couple of different ways. And then, by the way, in this one, you're renovating, because the domestic relations court is actually the neediest court. They do not have good security. Their magistrates don't have good places to be, but here you're renovating that. In the second version, we're doing kind of the same thing, but in this version, we're actually taking the domestic relations court, and that becomes part of the plan. We consolidate them, and they vacate the old courthouse. Once again, the same disadvantages. It's even more costly and more disruptive. Takes more time. The third idea, and by the way, all these were costed out. So we have cost estimates, we have schedules. The third idea is a partial reuse, but what we're actually doing here is we are building the new jail on site. We're not going off site. So we're using our site partially. What that shows you, by the way, if you actually demolished or moved from jail 1 to this building, that's the mass of what you would have to build vertically, which is not something people would necessarily like to see right here on the street, but that's what you would actually have to do. And then once again, you would demolish jail 1, and you'd construct the addition space for domestic relations and swing space, and eventually you would renovate the old courthouse. And the final version of this is the full replacement, where you would actually construct this building for a new jail to replace jail 1 and jail 2. You would then demolish jail 1 and jail 2. That becomes the mass for your new court building and domestic relations court. And ultimately, you vacate the old or the tower. You demolish it, and this is where you actually do this. Ideally, you still need support space for office space. This solution, a huge amount of time to get this all done, probably more than a decade. Even if you work quickly, a huge cost in doing this. Yeah, you have some advantages, but you have some real disadvantages. And at the end of the day, you still have jails that are, and by the way, here's the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues. As soon as you build a high-rise jail, you're committed to the size of that jail. You either have to build it out for 2,600, for 2,500, for 1,600. It's not like you're going to add floors to the jail or build a new jail building next to it. This is a shell. And you're hearing lightning and thunder in my background. I hope I keep my internet connection. So each one of those 4 ideas was rejected by the steering committee because they all involve the highest cost, the poorest jail operation, the least flexibility, and the longest duration for implementation. So now we go to the second set of options, which would be relocate the jail to a new site, but renovate or replace the courts and related agencies in place. Now, and there were 2 versions of this. Version A, you expand or renovate the courts in place, or version B, you replace the courthouse in place on the same site. And we had a lot of exploration. I'm not going to go through this, but we looked at a lot of other facilities where this has been done, because I would say that about 50% of the time, this is now what is happening, where people have separate facilities for their jail. Here's Philadelphia, where they built a detention center, but kept their courts downtown. And there's other examples, Newark and other examples where this is done very effectively. One of the questions was, well, now we're transporting. How expensive and difficult is it to transport somebody from an offsite location back to the jail. And we did an exhaustive study of the costs, the transportation costs, what would be involved, how many would you have to move per day, what are the staging costs, what is the bus transport cost, and you can see in this, I have where this is all discussed, and there's actually 2 or 3 meetings where we have the numbers, but at the end of the day, the costs are really this. You're going to have on an annual basis about $200,000 for the intake transfer staff, the transport staff, the vehicle cost, and these are specialty buses that are done with this. We anticipate you'd need 2 of them. If you analyze that cost and put an annual value on it, your cost of doing this is about $812,000 per year. And we vetted this several different ways. And we would have to add that to the cost of what we're doing. But in terms of what we save and how efficient it is, it works very well. I would also say that when we started this, there was a lot of concern about how much of this kind of interface between the jail and the court could be done electronically in meetings like this, Zoom. This was before COVID and before people got used to this. In other jurisdictions now, doing much more of this remotely has become much more comfortable and much more accepted by lawyers and others. So that was anticipated to be part of this, but we think the acceptance of that has grown quite a bit. So now when we look at these options, there's really 2 versions of this. One would be to relocate the jail offsite in a campus facility and then renovate the courts in place. And what you would still have to do, you would acquire a site, build a jail offsite. Immediately, you could demolish the PA. Well, I don't know about immediately because this depends on the deal with the city right now. But at a point in time, we thought you could take access to and demolish the PAB building. That is your swing space, because as soon as you renovate this tower, you have to take 4 floors of judges out to do it efficiently. Plus, you have to have space as you start to move the domestic relations court. But the idea would then be that you demolish jail 1 and 2. You'd have the phase renovation of the courts tower. You could have your parking facility, and you could do this literally all on site. That is one version of doing this. A second version of doing this is to replace the courthouse in place. And in this version, to make it clear, you are renovating the tower. Ultimately, you're using your tower and renovating. In the second version, you're actually moving off site, and in stages, you're going to build new facilities stage by stage. And ultimately, you're going to demolish the court tower, get everything you need on site to take care of what exists in, Courthouse Square and over at the domestic relations court, etc. Both of these options are high cost. Both of them take a considerable amount of time to do. They do eliminate your direct connection, but they're very disruptive to ongoing operations, and they're relatively costly and time consuming. However, having said that, as we went through this, the idea was we're going to eliminate 2B, which is the idea of building a whole new court right on that site. If you're going to build a new low-rise court, you can go to another site and do it much faster and much more effectively within a few blocks of where we are. It's much more difficult to build a new court on that site. But we did maintain the option of renovating the current court's tower. So that's one of the 2 options that still remain with what to do with the courts. We now go to the third set of options, which is develop a new court and jail facility on new sites. And once again, there are 3 possibilities here. One is you have a new court and jail on a new urban site. And this would be a relatively mid to high-rise courthouse with it's got to be a high-rise jail because you're on an urban site, can't spread out over 30 acres. 3B, a new courthouse and jail on a new campus site. So now we go to a campus, we have a low-rise jail, but we move the court out to that campus. And number 3, you separate them. You have a new jail on a campus site outside of the downtown core, but you have a new courthouse, a mid-rise on a new site within the downtown core, close by to where we are right now. Once again, as we looked at these three options, this is the new jail and courthouse on an urban site. And the idea would be we find the urban site. It's probably got to be 2 or 3 city blocks to do this, 18 to 20 some acres. And we simply build the new courthouse there. We build the new parking there. We build the new jail there. And when we get done, we move everything and have this site available. The issue with this, and this, by the way, is not as expensive, surprisingly, as any of the options that you would have with renovating on this project. And you could get done much more quickly because you don't have to go through phased renovations over literally many, many years. But this is still an expensive option. Plus the fact at the end of the day, you are still ending up with a high-rise jail, which is not flexible. You're going to have to build that jail out for 2,600, 2,800, or you're going to have to build out shell space where you anticipate future growth. And once again, your operators do not like high-rise jail operations. They feel that there's safety, security, and other issues, and they prefer low-rise operations. So that's 3A. 3B would be a new jail and courthouse on a campus site. Now, this idea is you go out to a campus, you build your low-rise jail, and of course that site, that real estate is less expensive than downtown. And then you go out there and you build your low-rise courthouse out there on that site. Frankly, this option, but for one problem, is probably the least expensive option. Just from the point of view of having a coordinated facility, it's the least expensive. It is what some jurisdictions have done, but it has one critical issue. And that critical issue is it means your courthouse is no longer downtown. You're moving out of the downtown core. This was the option that the steering committee and everybody else who saw this said that's unacceptable. We cannot move the courts away from downtown Cleveland. And so this option was rejected. 3C is the option of saying, okay, we're going to build our campus jail in a new site, off-site, and then we're going to look ultimately to acquire a site downtown. It doesn't have to be a site that's big enough for a jail, which is what really takes all the space, but just big enough to build a mid-rise courthouse not far away. Within a matter of blocks of here, we'll find the property, do a mid-rise courthouse, and then replace all of this because we'll be done with this. That actually is it's also one of the lowest cost alternatives. It satisfies the best needs for the jail. It's a less expensive option for the courthouse than renovating. You get done with it a lot quicker. And that is an option that was studied. We put costs to it, and that is an option that the steering committee wanted us to continue to consider. So but the other two were eliminated, by the way. They don't want to think about a high-rise jail downtown with a high-rise courthouse, and they don't want to think about a low-rise campus outside of the downtown area. But they would consider and have agreed to the jail outside of downtown and a new courthouse downtown. So at the end of the day, that left two options, and we'll talk about that. COVID hit, and we were asked to explore some other ideas. First of all, we were asked whether or not this analysis fundamentally changes post-COVID. And actually, some of the things about it got better in the sense that people are more accustomed to using remote systems and things like that actually improved. But we were asked about three things. Number one, what about a split jail? Well, maybe what we do is we keep jail 2 for pretrial, so it's close to the courts, and long-term detainees we put on a site off-site. Can we study that? That's number one. Number two, what if the population can stay consistently less than 1,000? Does it make sense then to renovate downtown and versus building a jail for 1,000? not 1,600 or 2,400, but 1,000? What about that? And then what if we just do nothing right now? What if we just wait and see what happens? What is the cost of delay or the cost of doing nothing? All these were studied. And I'm not going to do this in detail, but question number one, can we use jail 2 for pretrial population and build a smaller remote facility for long-term stay outside of downtown? And the answer is no, for several reasons. First of all, the capacity of jail 2, which would be left for this, it would only accommodate 43% of the pretrial population. You need 1,100 beds for the pretrial population, which is most of what you have. Jail 2 would only accommodate 472, even renovated. So you still have this huge gap. You'd either have to build another big facility or you're going to be transporting people back and forth. So it's just not set up properly. And any way that you tried to do it, you would now have a duplication of services at 2 jails. Your project cost to actually do it would be well in excess of what we're talking about. You're still going to have transportation back and forth because you can't put everybody at jail 2. You're still going to have increased operational costs because jail 2 still has increased operational costs. And it just did not make any sense. We studied it thoroughly, thought, but it doesn't make any sense. The second thing we talked about, and oh, by the way, second thing we said is, okay, what if we're comparing the wrong things? What if you could get the jail down to 1,000? So now you're comparing building a jail for just 1,000 off-site, or just renovating jail 2 with a small annex for a jail on-site. Well, once again, it has a lot of issues, but we actually did a comparative cost study. Now, this is not the cost of a 1,600 jail expandable to 2,400. This is the cost of a 1,000-person new jail on a new site. At the end of the day, $396 million. But to renovate jail 2 and put the annex so that you could just have 1,000 on-site, that's $100 million more. But the problem is it doesn't solve your most fundamental problems. So the difference is $94 million in construction cost, but you're going to have a net loss of $10 million a year in operational savings. You could get some operational savings, some of that $15 to $19 million back, but you can only get $5 million back. You're still going to have operational losses if you do this. And then you still have the loss of flexibility. Now we use jail 2 and build something, but it is not a campus facility. And if we build it wrong, we either have too much space or not enough space. And we can't be flexible. We can't do it in a modular way. And there's still programmatic issues with the high-rise facility. The third study we did, what's the cost of doing nothing? Well, there's 2 costs. Number one, obviously keeping people in that jail facility is as much as good as we are doing. Right now, I think your staff is doing a great job of everything they can, but inherently there's a problem and there's a human cost in that facility because it is not a good facility for a lot of reasons for staff. But just construction operations costs. There's a study. I'm not going to go through it now. You can look at the 11/12/20 meeting and you'll see just basically what is the annual cost that we lose in not maximizing operational efficiency and not going forward with construction because we're still spending a lot of money to renovate and do other things. And there's actually some elements that are not considered in this that I'm not going to talk about today. But the annual cost of doing nothing on that jail is at least $45 million a year. So what are the ultimate reasons now that we're doing a new versus a renovated jail and keeping these 2 other court options available? Well, number one, a new campus jail has greatly improved conditions for inmates and staff, more natural light, better recreation, safer, more secure. Number 2, the construction cost. I'm not going to go through it right now, but if you take a look at the 11/12/20 meeting at page 88, this is the full-blown construction cost. Even if you did it, if you build the jail we're talking about, and right now we have a $499 million all-in budget. That's both hard costs and soft costs. We hope to reduce that, by the way. But apples to apples, doing the same thing and trying to renovate our downtown facilities, apples to apples, without getting all the programmatic advantages of a campus, it would cost $625 million and take a lot longer to do. So there's no way that you can get a renovated jail for less. It's always going to cost more. The renovated, actually, when I say not net operational cost savings, that would be if you actually renovated, use jail 2, but your net, because you get some savings from doing that, your net operational savings by building new offsite is at least $10 million a year, and that adds up. And that's the explanation for the 5 million. And then the time required for implementation. If we try to go through the process of renovating that jail, by the time you build the annex, move people to the annex, then start the renovation, it will take years more to do than a build new jail now. So those are all the ultimate reasons. And those are the reasons that we had a lot of other reasons. These are the ones the steering committee focused on. So ultimately in November, by a 12-0 vote, they did vote that we're going to do a new jail on a site outside of the downtown Cleveland core. Once again, to have the capacity and the facility could, with expansion, get up to 2,400 beds. We'll have core facilities for that, but the housing units would be 1,600. And then the second determination was, and to continue to consider, of those 9 options, there's 2 that we're going to continue to look at. One of those options, they both obviously have the new campus jail. One of the options is building a new downtown courthouse close to where we are. And the other option is still looking to renovate the existing Justice Center. And by the way, we have gone down the path of doing the cost evaluation of both. We have not yet presented that to the steering committee though, because we haven't done that yet. So that hasn't been done publicly yet. We had some other determinations on that day. And this is where we said we're going to go forward and initiate the site exploration selection process that you as a council know something about now. That we are going to prepare and issue the RFQ for the jail criteria architect. In a minute, you will see the results of that. Obviously, commence work on the creation of a capital financing plan. And we had 2 more meetings after that. In January, we actually went through the program. Here's what we want to build the jail program. I am not in this meeting going to start to take you through the whole jail program. That's another exercise where we get into detail about the details of what's in that program. That will be a long, involved meeting, but there's been countless work. There's been a ton of work. And by the way, if you look through the presentations I gave you and go online, the program is actually online. You can read it yourself right now. And it's pretty self-explanatory what the program is. And then in March, we talked about what the project delivery method would be. And that was approved also using the bridge and design build method, the same method we successfully used on the hotel and on the convention center. So next steps, and I've shared this with some of you, but obviously we're going down the path of designing this project. That starts with your approval of the criteria architect today. Property acquisition, that's a matter for council that you'll get into more in other ways. There has to be implementation of a project funding plan that harvests the savings that I told you about. We still have to develop the operations plan and eventual transition plan. Part of the operations plan has to do with that information technology, the jail expediter to get the population down. Part of it is just how are you going to operate a jail with central booking that we're starting, and how do you transition to the new facility? The continued implementation of everything I told you about with population management. And once again, if we build 1,600 unit housing jail, that implies a 1,350 jail population. Our jail population has been creeping up lately, and we're going to have to focus very much on whether we can keep it down, or else we're going to have to end up in this design phase building a bigger jail, and nobody wants to do that. And of course, that's all of the efforts on all of these things here that I'm not going to talk more about right now. So now, in terms of building this jail, we're using this design build approach. The owner selects the criteria architect. That's what you're going to talk about in a couple minutes. And you'll hear about the process to get them. They then work through a series of work items. They confirm the program that we have. They assist with our site selection process, and they go through our various design phases. And I don't know, I'm not going to go through this now unless you want to, and maybe Matt or someone else wants to comment on this, but the first 3 months, it's program confirmation. It's challenging the program while respecting it, figuring out if we can get efficiencies. It is confirming the final program and test fitting to potential sites that we're talking about. We also have to coordinate this with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. They have their own schedule for doing things. And we've had our preliminary meeting, but we have to adopt our schedule to theirs and their schedule to ours. So that's a behind the scenes thing that we're doing. But at a point in time, we get done with this program confirmation and we're off to the races with schematic design. That's another 3 months. And now we are preparing the actual line drawings, adjacencies, and schematic design. We're working with our schematic design budget and cost estimate. Hopefully by this time, we have a better idea of the narrow sites that we're looking at. So we make sure what we're doing fits on whatever sites we're still considering. And at the end of this stage, we do go back and we get approval of schematic design. By the way, we want the design builder to be on board by this time because they're helping us with cost estimating and they're challenging what we're doing. But there's going to be approval by the county, by the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, and the steering committee does get an approval. We move through design development, another 4 months. This is where we take those line drawings and now we put all the design elements in. Very comprehensive work that we do. We won't talk about it now. We reconcile cost and budget, but at the end of this period, we have enough information that we can actually go forward and get the guaranteed maximum price. This is exactly how we did it on the hotel. And this is how we've done a lot of other similar projects throughout the country. And many of the people involved in this process, in fact, the criteria architect has done this several times on jails, going through the same kind of process. We get the same approvals again. With that package, it's probably going to take us another 2 months to get the guaranteed maximum price completely finalized. Now, if we have control of the site, we may throw off some early packages. We may actually start to remediate the site if we have to. We may have demolition that we have to do, and we may have a site clearing package and even a package that moves some dirt around to get to level. That all can be happening simultaneously. But serious construction really is going to begin after that GMP and after we are secure in our price. And then we'll start to throw off packages. All construction documents for every package will take another 8 months to develop, but early packages will be done. And because we have the assurance of a price guarantee, we'll be able to start with what I already mentioned, plus purchasing steel, foundation packages, et cetera. And this is the way a fast track project works, where you have the assurance of a GMP. And what happens is this criteria architect, now the construction documents are actually prepared by the architect of record working for the design builder, but this criteria architect stays on board and reviews it for conformance with design intent. And then they go on to construction administration services. So I'm going to take a deep breath. And at this point in time, I would turn it over to talk about the criteria architect selection. Mike, I didn't know if you wanted to have Matt just finish that piece up and then take questions, or take questions now.
Let me see if there are any questions, because you're kind of going in and out a little bit, probably with your
I'm sorry about that.
To members of the committee, do you have any questions at this point, or do you want to see the criteria architect selection presentation?
I can wait, Mr. Chair. It's Sunny. I do have questions, but so we can keep flowing through the presentation, I'll wait.
I can wait too.
Okay. Okay. Well, then let Mike Dever, then let's do that.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. By the way, can you guys hear? I'm sorry if I didn't realize I was going in and out. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, you're not
You're
bad.
all right.
You're not bad.
Well, I apologize for that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen then, but if we need to go back to those slides, I can resume later.
Okay.
All right, Councilman, if I could, then Matt Reimer is going to take us through the selection, how we selected the group that's before you today.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Chairman and Council Committee members. Matt Reimer with the Department of Public Works. You should be seeing, if I could have an independent confirmation that you're seeing my screen, which has a slide labeled Criteria Architect RFQ.
Yep.
Great,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you.
Gotcha.
All right, I hit slideshow. We'll see when it actually comes up, but it is at least being shown. So we started, as Jeff indicated, with the determinations from the Executive Steering Committee that the project delivery method was going to be bridging design build, and then with the determination to approve going forward with a request for qualifications with our criteria architect. The county worked with Jeff as our owner's rep, and we issued the request for qualifications on April 7th of this year. This RFQ had a pre-bid conference that was held in April of 2021. That was via phone call because of COVID restrictions. And then all of our statements of qualifications were due in early May of this year. A selection committee was established, and you can see on the left-hand side of this slide who the selection committee members were. Representation was from the corrections administrator, the chief of public safety, director of public works, clerk of courts, sheriff's department, municipal court administrative and presiding judge, prosecutor's office, and leadership of the common police court were all members of the selection committee. We met first to go over the statements of qualifications and provide a written scoring of those statements of qualifications, and then developed a short list of 3 firms to move forward to the interview stage. So I'm going to go to the next slide. This is a summary of our submitted firms for the initial request for qualifications responses: AECOM, Dewberry, DLR, HDR, and HOK, HOK being the firm that is in front of you today with the legislation. 3 of those firms were high enough scored that they went to the interview stage. And this was a limited on-site interview, as well as supporting Microsoft Teams staffs interviewing each firms, DLR, HDR, and HOK. Here in this slide, we're showing just this was the scoring of the request for, the statement of qualifications that got us to the short list of going to the interview stage. As you can see the scoring on the right 3 columns for the DLR group, HDR, and HOK, which were evaluated to be the firms to move forward to the interview stage. And then in conducting of those interviews, we selected HOK based on their breadth of experience, the significant amount of local participation that the HOK team was bringing to this criteria architect and engineering services contract, as well as the cohesive team and the performance of the team in related experienced projects throughout the Midwest and throughout the country. So with respect to the next steps regarding criteria architect, then following the selection that the committee made, the next step was to go before the steering committee for approval of that selection. And as Jeff indicated in his slide deck, that happened on June 10th of this year at the executive steering committee, where the committee did approve moving forward with the selection of HOK. The county and Jeff as our owner's rep then also finalized and negotiated the contract that's presented to you today for selection. And with approval of this contract, we'll then start the design process. As stated in the legislation, this is an $8 million not to exceed contract with services provided up to the December 31st of 2025. And $4 million of it was appropriated last week at the council meeting. That was intended to be for the portion of the contract for this calendar year. Remaining appropriations will happen in future budget years. With that, I stand ready to answer your questions. I was going to go through the some of the different scope items that the contract holds, but I think Jeff did a great job of summarizing that in his final 3 slides there. Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. To the committee, any questions regarding the criteria architectural services legislation? Okay, hearing none, I would assume we want to move forward on this.
Hey,
Mr.
I have
Gabbard.
questions.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Is this appropriate time to go through the questions now that we heard from Public Works?
Regarding this legislation, regarding the architectural legislation, or do you have a broad question that encompasses
Yeah, it's
this
just-
also?
Well, let me ask this.
Yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead, go ahead.
If we approve their criteria, architect, the next step, are we locked in at that point to the design capacity for the jail, the number of jail and all of that? Or we're just moving forward to let this thing progress and then we can get into details at the next stage?
So if I could answer that, we're not locked in at all. In fact, the first step, and by the way, I want to make a point. All three of these firms are great firms. We were able to pick from fabulous firms, and just because DLR, who was our original firm, didn't get it, it didn't mean they didn't have a great team and a great presentation. We just had tremendous resources to pick from. The first step of this is actually to ask the new team to challenge the program that we already did. Now, even if DLR had gotten it, they would have had a different team come in and do the same thing. You always challenge the program. So they're going to come in and they're going to challenge it. And they're going to talk about, did you think about this? What about this? So we will be challenged, and they will be meeting with everybody to talk through those challenges. This is sort of a normal part of the process. The second thing is even and that's 90 days. And even at the end of that program, the one thing we're going to keep doing is we're going to keep monitoring what's going on with population management, because we have to. I hope we don't change what we're doing, but the truth of the matter is, because of the modular way this is being done, and because housing units can expand or contract, we can we can design the building and design the modular units. We have to decide kind of what the right size is that we could add or take away. I mean, if you say we're going to build this so that you have a choice of, adding 300 units or not, that's not going to help. We need smaller units. But we want to be in a position where we can say we're monitoring this. We will have designed these units. So all the design is done. And, with relatively quick response, if we're off, we could add or even subtract, so that there's going to be flexibility as we go forward. Now, if you're asking the question about, can we go back to the decision of whether we want to build a courthouse, that we can't do, because we have to, from the get-go, we have to decide, because the jail is very different whether it's attached or not attached. So that decision has been made. But the size, and frankly, even some of the programmatic elements, what may also be on that site, that's all that can continue to evolve.
Okay, thank you. I'm pretty clear that once we move forward, that the jail's going to be disconnected from the courthouse, and we all, I think, at this point understand. So thank you. I did hear you say, Jeff Applebaum, that the amount of expansion for the units for jail population, we can go up to 24. What did you say?
2,400. Start at 1,600, you can get up to 2,400.
But I thought you said those were not housing units specifically, that is it a different holding facility for the expansion, or we don't know that yet?
Think about it this way. Think about it like it was a hub and spokes. Okay, so there's a central hub, and there's a central hub. There are central services that you need no matter what. Your food service, your security, your how central booking works. And there's just a lot of things that are kind of central, and they are not part of the housing units. The housing units are actually the most expensive thing to do. But the idea is you create the core. So even if you're starting at 1,600, you could add housing units all the way up to 2,400. Parking, for example. But then what you do is you build out the housing units for 1,600. But if you have to expand, and if you have to add housing, think of it modularly. If you had to add these modules, because there'll be room for them on a site, and there'll actually be a place for them to go if you ever need them, then you can add those units. So your core is big enough to absorb additional housing units, but you're not building out the housing units at the beginning. The additional.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I just want to reiterate, we're going to do everything in our power to reduce jail population with central booking and diversion, all these programs and facilities we put in place. But right now, crime is spiking. And we can't predict the future. And it's very important that we don't end up where we are now with overcapacity of residents of the jail, and horrible things happen at that point if there's not enough space. I'd rather spend the money now to ensure that there's safety down the road, so I want to make sure that that's in place, that we really can expand. We're not relying on these other programs, and that you're telling me, yes, that we will be able to expand through these modules. So that's one thing that's really important. And I also want to point out that I love the campus idea and programming, but, want to make sure, for everybody's sake, we said this about the juvenile court detention center, that they had like a baking place, a cooking place, a dentist chair. That's all. Nobody's even using that. So as, overseeing body of this jail, I want to make sure, and we can't do this today.
Sonny, you froze.
Good.
You're freezing up.
All right, move on.
So just two comments on that. Number one, we're going to come back to you on program. So you will see more about the program as it evolves and about those concerns. The other thing, I want to come back to one thing you said. In my view, the number one reason for not doing a vertical downtown jail is because you have no flexibility. You're stuck. Think about a campus. If it's horizontal, you can add and subtract. If you do this vertically, you're stuck. And you can go to other jail facilities in the country where there are thousands where people have built larger jails, and maybe, and I suspect in the next few months, some of those are going to fill more than they had been. But from what they were at the beginning, there are large jails that have thousands of vacant units, and they couldn't do anything about it because they had to build it large just in case. So we need the flexibility, I think.
Thanks. Am I still frozen, Mr. Chair?
No, you're good now.
Okay, I'll be brief. That meant I was long-winded. I would like to see this on a sustainable campus on the roof with solar panels and permeable pavement, and recognize that we want to preserve whatever trees exist where we go and make sure that it's up to speed with those types of amenities for our future facility. So that has to be factored into the cost. That's on one person, but I think it's important.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, through the chair to Councilwoman Simon, I just want to say that was one of the primary reasons why we highly ranked this team so good. They come in with a significant experience in getting to lead design, as well as the new WELL certification, which is a physical and mental health certification that is being done in these facilities. And they were a leader in this front based on our review of the qualifications.
Good. Okay. Any other questions?
If I may.
Pardon?
Ian Baker.
Yep. Go ahead, Nan.
Thanks. This is probably, it sounds like this is the last opportunity that I have to ask about the courts and the jail and the diversion center, that whole big picture of things. I heard you say, Mr. Applebaum, that the steering committee just dismissed not having the courts move away from downtown. They're going to move a little, maybe a few blocks away, but not out of downtown. And I'm not sure where we're putting that diversion center, but we are also in very close conversations with that building, which is related to the jail. It's a place where you go rather than the jail, but it is still part of that corrections, or helpful instead of going to corrections. But I guess I didn't really hear a reason, and this is probably my last time to ask. I didn't really hear a good reason why the courts couldn't be part of the jail campus. I mean, when you think about the ease of people visiting, that's easier than visiting downtown. When you think about parking would be easier. When you think about the access for inmates or those waiting for their court date to talk to their attorneys, or have access to court, it would be easier. I don't understand what is the underlying reason why we can't make that into a true campus to be completely efficient than to have to worry about driving back and forth. Do you have an answer to that other than it was just?
I can tell you what I know, and keep in mind, I want to make clear that on an issue like this, my role is as a owner's rep and a facilitator. My role is not to impose, my personal views. So I just I'm going to report to you. But what we did, we put this through various forms of focus groups because it is not unheard of to move the courthouse outside of downtown. It's been done. And in fact, to a degree, that's what's going on in Indianapolis right now and Detroit. Although there's just as many jurisdictions that are doing what we're talking about doing. So there was a very, very strong perception by those everybody in the community, judges, the bar, both the civil and the defense bar, both prosecutor and defender, all of them had an extremely strong reaction that the courts have to stay, near to where they are, that is the center of the legal community. That's where the lawyers are, et cetera, that there's a reason to want to maintain. And then there's, we want to maintain a strong urban core. We don't want to get so much into, suburbia. We want a focus for people to do business downtown. And there's just a very strong preference to have the courts remain close to where they are. And we did three kinds of things. Obviously, we pulled the steering committee, and it was a very strong preference. We were then asked to, and we went out, not that we pulled the bar. We did stuff with the Bar Association, and they did a widespread polling, and it was very strong preference. But then we actually did a public polling, if you will. We went on the county website, we put up a series of questions, and we got several hundred answers to those questions. And that polling reflected a very strong preference to have the courts downtown. So I can't really say much beyond that. But that is what the reflection was.
So if I may, within that polling of the public, and even through the bar and the judges, the question never extended beyond, do you want to stay in Cleveland or move outside of Cleveland? And not far outside. We're not talking
It did.
20 miles away. We're talking a few miles away.
We actually
has more property.
We pulled a mile away, 2 miles away, 3 miles. We actually went through the process of saying, how far are you willing to go before you're not willing to go any further? We did that. I mean, because we were trying to figure out if there's even a place, and I don't want to get into specific sites, but if we could get to a site that's 25 blocks outside of downtown, would you go there? And all I can tell you is that, we went through all those permutations and we actually did it in detail. In fact, when we looked at sites, we had red light, green light, orange light. So we did this in every way that we could think of. Mike Dever, maybe I'm not doing a very good job of explaining.
Actually, yeah, just in addition to other services, one specifically, public transportation. Most, if not all, of the public transportation comes into the core of the city as it is now. And then whatever ancillary services too, those that support the courts that are surrounded in the downtown area, even restaurants for those people that work downtown. So those were all brought up before the committee on multiple occasions. And we kept coming back to it needed to be within, I think it was less than a mile of the downtown, Jeff, ultimately, that needed to stay in the core.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Gentlemen,
I'm sorry.
Gentlemen, let me, Nan, well, I think this is a good question and a good place to go later on. Let's concentrate on the architect. Once we do this, we jump right back into this. But The reality that we were dealing with is the courts have to be located in the county seat, that being the city of Cleveland. So our options, even if we had consensus to move outside the downtown city core, which we weren't even close to. So I mean, that literally got taken off the table almost before we even started. There was no interest in that whatsoever. Also keeping in mind, we're coming off licking our wounds with the Juvenile Justice Center, a campus facility that is a complete disaster that should have been in the downtown core, part of a community of courts in downtown Cleveland, which we don't have. We have the federal court downtown, we have the common pleas, we have all of our county courts downtown, we have the Cleveland Community Court downtown, and then this anomaly of juvenile out in the middle of nowhere as a political payback to the juvenile justice from the then sitting county commissioners in a tete-a-tete that just didn't have to happen, but it did happen. And that's exactly how that happened. And like Jeff said, we went literally like, are you willing to go a block? Are you willing to go a quarter mile? Are you willing to go a mile? So it was very much influenced by the users of the court with the thought of the public that uses the court, what would be most convenient. And being as close to, if we were going to build a new justice center, being as close to where we are right now is ideal. And we're not there yet, but the jail got separated quickly. We were all in consensus with that, and we'll deal with that. But I want to deal with the architect right now. We can go through all the machinations that we went through, and what you're asking, we went through.
Yeah.
So, but you don't know that. So that's a good question to ask, and we could take you through that.
Yeah, I guess, Mike, the only thing that might be different though between the steering committee asking and me asking is, I guess I'm taking it from a different perspective of thinking more about the people that are in the jails and thinking more about the people who visit those jails, not worrying so much about whether the judges like it or whether or not it's a little more inconvenient for them, or whether or not there's restaurants that they now can't go to. I'm thinking more about what is more efficient for the people that are there and people that are visiting, and for them being able to easily go from one place to the other without worrying about transportation.
And
I don't know
those,
if that's maybe a different perspective.
No.
The judges, I'm not too worried about whether they're more inconvenient or it's not in the core, or, it's not what they're used to or things like that.
it's all of these were considered, debated, and discussed. And like I said, when you look at the diversity of the committee, the 12 members, these are 12 members that come from different aspects, and the county council being one aspect of it. And when you get a 12-0 vote on anything in this committee, I can assure you a 12-0 vote means that's the right thing to do. But these are good questions, and we need to have you get those answers, and we're willing to do that. But if we could just concentrate on the legislation right now, we can, I think, hopefully move quickly on that and then come right back to your
Okay.
concerns.
Okay.
Sonny,
my
did
dog.
you have a follow-up?
My dog was barking and I thought I was muted. So no, I can answer some questions of colleague Baker at that other time as well. So
We could get right back into that, and I want
Yep.
to, but I wanted.
oh, just the city of Cleveland. One thing, as we go with the architect legislation, maybe this is after too, is, I kind of need to know where Cleveland is and if they're going to be participating in the cost of what we're even doing with this legislation in front of us.
Wouldn't we all? So we'll. So, and are there general questions concerning the legislation in front of us?
Mike, I'm not sure whether it's
Pardon, I'm hearing I hear Mr. Miller, and who else?
Mr. Schramm.
Okay, can I take Mr. Miller first and Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I will be brief. Just two things. First, I want to support what Ms. Simon had to say about the sustainability, and I also agree that that's very important for a project of this size and scope. And the second thing is that I want to commend the consultant team for their leadership and the amount of emphasis that you've given to population management, and that I agree that the flexibility is important, but we don't want the flexibility to lead to us letting our guard down or making a half-hearted effort on population management, because if we do that, it is going to get out of control. And so I just hope that this council and the administration would give it the same level of commitment and emphasis and effort that the consultant team did so well in the work for us so far. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And again, when the committee is done with recommendations, this council will be making the final determination. So this is all good information they have. Mr. Schrein.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I recall from Mr. Applebaum's previous presentations, was there not a discussion as far as flexibility in the architectural design that would allow us to put a second floor on? I thought, was that not, maybe I misunderstood that?
If I may, there right now, we have the option to do this as a single floor, what's called a 2/2, even 3. So that decision hasn't been made yet. I mean, any one of those is completely different than a high rise, and any one of those can be expandable and do everything we've talked about. Part of it simply has to do with the site and the layout, but we have the option completely on the table to do it either way.
Okay, but a 2-on-2, just for my simplistic thoughts, as far as the housing space, would double your space just by stacking one unit on top of the next unit, and it cuts your footprint down in half of what it would be, at least for the housing unit, seems to me, as far as the amount of. It doesn't take care of the other spaces. I understand all the other free spaces have to be done no matter what kind of facility you build, but it just seems to me if you stack them, you're going to have a little, maybe not double, but you're going to get pretty close to that, I would seem to me.
Yeah, I want to make one thing clear. A 2/2 can actually be done as it's a 1-story building. So even a 1-story building can be 2/2, if you will. I have no doubt. Well, I should be careful. I don't want to design the project. We'll let the designer design the project, but there is the ability to make the building more efficient. Some of the concerns you get into are things we want to think about is, for example, where does natural light come in? You know, from the back, from the front, on top. But what you were talking about, clearly we're going to be talking about efficiencies that can be gained. And that's one of the areas where HOK will come in, because they've done these things as low rise, but multiple stories. And we'll talk through all of that stuff.
But I can only assume that second floor could be also built as your flexibility space to be even added at a subsequent time, could it not?
No, that would not work well because of the structure and the way it's done. It's much better just to have the modules. But if you actually look at the picture I showed, when I showed you the ideal situation,
right? I did.
That's 2/2. So I mean that's not just a single level of floors.
Okay, so that's 2 levels of floor.
Yeah. Well, there's terminology. It's built as a single floor structure with 2 levels of cells.
Okay, Jeff and Jack, if we could, good questions, but let's get to the architect that might be designing this. So let's.
That is an architectural question, seems to me, Mike, because we got people telling us we're going to have to be putting second floor solar panels on. I want to make sure that we're not restricting ourselves as far as what our architect could be going after as far as from that standpoint. I want to make sure that we got flexibility for that too. And
let's get them on board here and then we'll take care of that. Anybody have any further questions regarding this legislation? And then we'll revisit Nan and Jack's concerns.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
thank you. Will the site selection impact the ability of the architect to proceed? I mean, will they have to pick a site first?
If I may, we can proceed with the first 90 days with what we know. Even the second 90 days, we can proceed without having a precise site, but a limited number of sites. Obviously, you can't have an architect designing a building on 5 different sites. But if we can get it down to a couple target sites, we can continue to move that way, or 3. So the schedule does contemplate what it contemplates. It contemplates going through programming. Basically, with the knowledge we have right now, we can get through that. And because of the criteria we've developed, any site that meets our criteria, we can go through the exercise, for example, that Jack talked about, because we're not going to have a site that's too small to be able to do either one of those options. You know, the lower option or the higher option. But
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, hearing none. And again, Jeff, I know you probably want to move forward. So if everyone's comfortable moving forward with resolution 2021-0157 to the full council under second reading suspension, I'll accept a motion in a second.
So moved, Simon.
Second, Jones.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Further discussion regarding this legislation? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike Dever. Okay, let's go back to Nan's questions. I think Sunny had a follow-up. Oh, Ms. Conwell?
I did. Okay, go ahead.
I'm
Conwell.
sorry, Ms. Conwell, did you have?
Yeah, I just had a quick one. What will be the lifespan of the new campus? Has that been determined?
That's a great question. And we haven't said specifically, but, you know, generally these things are, you know, thought of, and I should be careful here. But, you know, I would think generally that they're thought of in the, you know, minimum of 30 to 40 range. But I think, I don't, Matt Reimer, do you know if the department has a minimum requirement for design lifespan?
Jeff, I know exactly where to look if they do. So while the committee questions are ongoing, I'll research that right now and see if I can get a quick answer back to the committee.
Okay.
Yeah, but my imagination is there's a minimum, and I don't know exactly what it is, but you're talking in the 30 to 50, and if you do everything right, hopefully it goes beyond that. I don't know the exact number right now.
All right, thank you.
By the way, it may be in our program. We may have actually said in the program what it has to be designed to. It's 300 pages. I got to go take a look.
Okay, Sunny, please.
Sorry. Okay, so just want to talk about the movement of the court to answer my colleague's question. Just as a practical matter, the families who visit the people in jail usually are just there to visit. There's no need really to go to the courthouse to attend hearings during that same period. It's usually a separate visit. So it's not going to inconvenience them, but it's a really great question because if there's fees to be paid, bonds to be set, if there's anything that can happen, to convenience them, maybe we should have a satellite clerk at the campus. So I think that's a great question, but typically those two functions are different. The court appearances versus families just going to the jail to visit, their relatives. So it'd be nice to have like maybe a little satellite to pay bonds or something there. So that's a great question. My major concern is transportation. Like I said, we can barely get people, up to the courthouse now and they're in the same building. So we better understand the budget for that and to make that happen, to transport from this campus to wherever this justice center is going to be. Because we haven't been doing a good job of that.
Sonny, I can assure you that was a major concern and question. Jeff and his team went through that. We had the Philadelphia situation, which is obviously a larger court than us, with a jail that's going to be many, many miles longer away than what we're going to have. So again, the committee was very, very concerned about that and ultimately agreed that it was the right thing to do. So, but I have to rely on those that use the court, and those that use the court were comfortable, or those that lead the courts that were comfortable. Nan, did you have further questions?
Well, I'm still a bit anxious about the separation of the two. I know we're doing a little history on the Justice Center, and they did try at the time of the new tower, trying to get that on the ballot, and people at that time didn't want to see it separated. And finally, after 4 or 5 tries, they put it together with the police department, and it passed. So, I don't want to repeat what happened, although many years ago, and I know things change and people's attitudes change. But I guess I'm just concerned that we don't get too, make our decisions based on a group of people that are just digging their heels in, not wanting to make that those courthouses move because they just don't want it. I mean, it's just not something that they want to do. They like it where they're at. They want to have, that kind of control, and we lose sight of what's best for, Cuyahoga County and the residents and the people that are there. I too am concerned about the transportation. I mean, we hear about, those that are trying to escape, the troubles we have controlling inmates. Now we're going to transfer them from one place to another by bus. It just seems like we're lifting the liability there of what could happen that we don't have now. So I'll tell you honestly, I'm not sold on the idea of separating the two. Maybe I'll, as we get through the process and it looks like every question's been answered, but right now I don't know. I'm just not sure that that's the best route to go.
Well, again, what I try and rely on and lean on are those that are experts in the area, and we hired those experts. And then we had the backup of the committee, and many of those individuals work in the justice system themselves and run their courts and the prosecutor's office, public defender, and on and on. All we have to do is go out to Lorain County, where they have a justice center and a separated jail. It quite honestly is the way of the future. In the old days, as it were, you would have that connection of a courthouse and jail, and our justice center present was the ultimate at that time. It is now not, which is why we're in our discussions, and making a 1 or 2 or 3 level jail is the ultimate for everything. All of these have been gone through. And again, all the meetings are on tape. All the decisions of the committee are registered. We're going to provide that to everybody so you know what was discussed, who voted which way. There were a couple votes, like Jeff had 10-2. That was probably, in my thought mind, the oddest of votes that we had in making determinations. Usually it came in about 12-0 once we got down to our final options. As Jeff said earlier, the work done on this has been immense. Over 600 plus meetings with individuals that work in the system and the community involved. Community institutions, community outreach groups, just about everybody. And ultimately it comes to us. And here we are, and this is the time, and we're going to continue this. This isn't the last day we're going to do this. We're going to continue this discussion, because the more information that you and the rest of the council has, the better off we're all going to be and become more comfortable with the decisions that the committee has made. And again, I can't stress it enough. In the end, if this council is not in agreement with what the committee determines, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. And I make that very clear in the committee meetings. We can do whatever we want to do in those committees, but the council is going to make the determination. So a lot of work being done, a lot of, as Jeff went through it, I was having flashbacks of some of these meetings. It's not a sexy job going through all this, talking about a jail, but it becomes, in my mind's eye, a very important aspect of us getting moved forward in a positive direction with our justice system. And I am firmly in belief that when we have a jail that's up to date and functioning properly, it's going to be a win for everybody, in most particular the justice system itself. But if you have any other questions or concerns, we'll hear those.
If I may, just a couple. Has the conversation with the steering committee ever evolved around the diversion center? Was there any thought of having the diversion center as part of the jail campus?
What?
With the concern on that, Jeff, and I may you can jump in here. The diversion center, the purpose of that is not to bring somebody to jail. So right. You don't want to drive them by a jail with them thinking maybe they're going to go to jail. It has to be separate, and that's the psychology involved. It would be ideal because then you're close to the jail, but you're dealing with a sensitive individual in a sensitive situation. And from my understanding, and Jeff, you could follow up with this, is the psychology behind that is to afford them the opportunity to not go to jail. So Jeff, do you have any further on that?
Well, yeah, and I don't know to what degree you guys have been completely briefed on all the diversion concepts. So, and to be clear, we started in our committee and we went down the path of developing all the diversion concepts, and then that kind of broke off. And so I'm not doing that centrally anymore, but the concept is, there's this layered concept of point of attachment, in the first step training police, or even having non-police actually sometimes intervene. But the point that they were making is that they want a separation of diversion from the jail. So they certainly don't want it connected to or as part of the jail. Whether or not you can have a campus and it has a separate entrance, that's another story. But they don't want it as part of the jail. They don't want a situation where an officer feels that, the decision to take someone to a diversion center, what the heck, I'll just take them to central booking and let them decide, which they will do sometimes, but they want to have this clear distinction of having something that's completely separate for diversion. So that was part of the consideration.
Okay, well, I understand that. I don't think you have to have one connected to the other, or if you're talking about enough acreage, it seems to me you can separate the two, and they are related. And you may have an inmate that shouldn't be there, and the decision's made to transfer him over to the diversion center. I mean, I just think the flexibility there is worth whatever psychological downside there might be, because I don't know. I hope that it's at least considered, because we're talking about a diversion center now. It's millions of dollars in the Board of Control. It was first talked about being 20 million. Now we're up to maybe 40 or 50 million. And if we already have the complex and the room, I'm just saying, I hope that it's considered.
There are other complexes where you have, in a complex, you have the jail, and it's all there, and then there's a separate entrance, a separate way in. They're completely separate, but it is what you would consider the diversion center, and even a place for homeless. So that's done. So it's not impossible to do. I think the big consideration is you don't want them connected. You don't want them thought of as being the same facility.
Right. I get that. And then the last thing I guess I'll say for now is I too am concerned about the population number. We've been trying for quite a while to lower that number and have been unsuccessful. So we're at 1760, I think, right now. And we're talking about building something for 1,600 with the ability to expand, but we're already exceeding that. And the diversion center is now in place, at least in a temporary. And I believe the diversion center is only for those that have misdemeanors, not felonies. So that really reduces the population of people that can go to those diversion centers. So I know you've talked about all that. I'm sure it's all been on the table, but if you're asking what my concerns are, lowering the jail population and think we're going to build a jail based on better ideas of lowering it, I think is something we need to do before we build a jail. I think we need to show that we can lower them and not just come up with ways we think we can lower them, because we've been working on that for a while. That's all for now. Those were my three concerns, the separation of the courts. If I may ask, in the big picture of what we're proposing, of what I heard today, is the entire campus of high-rise courts and jail 1, jail 2, all the police station, is that whole corner going to be demolished when everything else is in place? Is that the plan?
No, I mean, there's two plans that remain. Keep in mind, we know we're moving the jail, but the two things we're still studying, one of them would be a renovation of the Justice Center in place. That is still on the table. We haven't taken it off the table. The other one, which would be a new mid-rise courthouse downtown, but close by, then that whole site would become available. But we still have the option on the table, because we're doing a comparative analysis of what would that renovation cost and what would it be. So it's not off the table yet.
So I remember in conversation that one of the reasons why we thought we should move is that the value of the real estate that we're on doesn't support the public use, that we could use that for something that is more valuable to Cuyahoga County than that. So renovating the existing court, to me, doesn't sound like doesn't sound like the smart way to go. But given that, let's say we move the courthouse, is there anything left on that parcel that we would keep? Is everything gone?
Yes. If you move the courthouse, the jails will be gone. The police administration building right now, it's currently being rented on a short-term basis by the city, but there'd be no use for that. So there's no reason why, if you move the courthouse, that there's any other function that has to stay on that site.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to ask those questions. I appreciate it.
Mr.
No
Chair,
problem.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Tillman.
Thank you. Mr. Applebaum, as far as the renovation goes, I thought you had indicated earlier that your studies had showed that renovating it would be not cost effective, that it would be too exorbitant. I thought that you had indicated that earlier with the sites.
Well, first of all, yes. First of all, the jail, absolutely. And yeah, renovating the courthouse would be more expensive and difficult than building new.
So why are we going through this? Why are we going through the dance of, hey, this is what it would be if we did? I mean, we know that.
Two
we know
reasons.
it's more expensive.
Two reasons. Number one, the steering committee hasn't taken it off the table yet. They want the continuing comparison of that. Number two, then you get into the question of, which I don't want to get into, what if you do just less and less and less in the courts tower and don't, you're not doing everything you should do. But I'll simply say this to you. Both of those options still remain, if for no other reason, to do the side-by-side comparison. And there's still two options that still remain in front of the steering committee.
Okay, I can appreciate that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mike? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, Nan, at the end, started going into those questions I was concerned about, which is the current use of that space. Have we done some analysis at all on this? Jeff, as far as the highest and best use if it was an empty space? And then what, it seems to me that if it's commercial, then it flips from a non-taxable space to a taxable space. Hopefully, if it goes into that. Have we done some analysis as to how the taxpayers would benefit if you put another high-rise hotel or rental property on there? Have we done some analysis of that? to help?
We have not in a public session presented any information on that. And right now, I think that's a relevant consideration as we go down the next part of the path, but we have not yet presented that publicly. And I also want to be careful. I just want to be careful about not letting the development possibilities be the driver. I think the first thing is what is the absolute best thing that we should be doing for the court system and for the jail system. But you're right. It's an economic consideration.
I get it, but we're making if we're the owners of the property, a good owner also asks the next question, okay, what if we have this space available? What are we going to do with it? And it just to me that we can see what happened on the property right next door to it, that it became a highest and best use to put that into the rental property field out there. The difference between that's owned by the county. This would be owned, theoretically, it could be done the same thing for as far as.
It is an extraordinarily valuable property.
Yeah.
There's probably not a more valuable property that you can find. There may be equally valuable properties, a very valuable property.
Right. Translate that into selling the land, translate that into paying real estate taxes. It really is something that helps us to sell this concept, I believe, to the taxpayers as to the full impact of the totality of a decision of this nature. It seems to me would be very beneficial before we go and push the button to also have done some 30,000 foot ideas on that out there. Flipping it the other way, are any of the sites going to be flipped into from a taxable sites into non-taxable sites when the government owns them? As far as the sites, and I'm not asking you to give us a specific site, but of the sites out there, it would appear that maybe that possibility could exist.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is it's possible. Yes.
Okay. All right. So we have to be prepared for that.
And that's part of the economic valuation, by the way.
Oh, it is. So we've taken out the taxable values to the.
Well, it's part of the consideration that people understand.
Okay. All right. But it's not in our numbers crunching at this point.
Not that you've seen.
Okay.
Yeah, we're taking that. We're the property consideration. We have to be careful about what we're talking about with property.
Okay. And then, I understand if you focus on one and say this is taxable, this will not be taxable, then we've already identified a potential piece of property. That was why I was trying to avoid that. You indicated that Indianapolis and Detroit are both going the opposite way of what is being suggested. Have we asked what was the criteria in Indianapolis and Detroit? Because obviously they must have had the same judges making their comments about wanting to stay downtown Detroit and downtown Indianapolis.
We know exactly what happened there, and we can have a conversation about it. And part of that, it's a different. I'm going to tell you that the situation with the courts and the considerations with the courts there are different than the considerations here. The considerations of what was provided to them by a third party are different than what's considered here. But the really good news about that is our criteria architect, HOK, was involved in both projects. So we know from an inside position exactly what happened there and what the discussions were. But those were both different situations than what we have here in some important respects.
Okay, could you at some point can you share that as to why Ms. Baker's questions? And it just seems to me that there's a question if it can be happening in city. Detroit is relatively the same size, and Indianapolis same size. Indianapolis is clearly a competitive city for convention space that we're always fighting with. Why one works there or why it doesn't.
Are you aware of the individual in Detroit who got involved
I'm not. Oh, if it's your, okay, if it's a certain individual at a very high level, then I'm aware of that individual.
And if that individual,
Hey, Jeff, does it rhyme with Dan Gilbert?
well, yeah, and there was a whole process that was involved there that was very influential on what happened with the property. I'll just say,
Okay.
I mean, it's a matter of public record. You could read about it, so it's no big secret.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just moving forward, as far as the steering committee goes, I appreciate the hard work they've done. Obviously, they're taking the job very seriously. It's just that I was under the impression that when we had the steering committee, that council would be presented with a few options and then make a decision based on options. And it appears that the steering committee has kind of come up with the end result, the answer, and said, here, this is what we've come up with. Do you like it or do you not like it, compared to the other options? So I would just ask on some of the future, issues that we might encounter, maybe council might be more involved in the process earlier on. And Mr. Chairman, I am aware that, the committees are open to the public. I get that. I just think as a body, as a whole, council seems to have a few questions regarding how we got to the place we are at with respect to location and such, or dividing the jail from the Justice Center or from the courthouse, I should say. And I just think it would go a long way to have maybe a little bit more communication. Maybe during safety committee might be the right place to do that as we move forward with the project. That would just be my request moving forward.
We could do that, but unfortunately, we're stuck with an MOU that our council president drafted at the time. So that's what the committee's running off of. I will tell you directly, I was against it. I thought it was not the right way to go, but it was, as Jeff had shown you, it was like a year of back and forth with the judges and the administration, and they were getting nowhere. And that's when Mr. Brady stepped in and agreed to this. So we're kind of stuck there. As far as informational, absolutely. Nothing happens here in a vacuum, clearly. And nothing earth-shattering happens out of any one meeting. It's over a period of time, and we can take you through that. Not a problem there, but it is, and I know not everybody has the time to do it. It's there. We can summarize it for you, but as far as our input, it is what it is. We're one of 11 votes.
If I may, Chair, may I comment on?
Mr. Chairman, do you have follow up?
No, I appreciate where you're coming from. I understand, the circumstances were difficult circumstances. We were trying to get moving on this. I just think council as the, watchdog of the taxpayers' money and making sure we're doing what's in the best interest of our constituents should have ultimately the final say on many of these major issues. And I'm not so sure we're having the final say on some of these things, but that's just my personal opinion.
We can always throw it out. There's nothing that states that, and I'm very clear in the committee meetings that they can do whatever they want. If there's a disagreement on the council, it's not going to go forward. Ultimately, it's ours. And I make that very clear. And to be honest with you, I kind of pride myself in being that financial bulldog as far as the treasury of the people is concerned. It's like I like to tell some of the members of the steering committee, you have a lot of wants, but you're going to get what you need. And that's not well received, but quite honestly, I don't care. We're here to provide the needs of the individual within the system, not their wants.
I appreciate that.
If you want to see the wants, go out to the Juvenile Justice Center as opposed to what they needed. And
right.
That's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Further questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to add on to Councilman Tuma. I think that perhaps if we were, had a little more information as we were going along from here on out, and whether it's an invitation to the Public Safety Committee to, have another update, maybe getting some feedback from other council members and that going back to the steering committee might help you in saying, listen, I'm not the only one who's concerned about this. I've got 3 other councilmen who we need to make sure are on board because we need the financial support of this plan. And if perhaps we get more engaged on an updated presentation like we are today, not as extensive, of course, but just an update saying this is a decision, it's pretty critical. We want to make sure council's brought up to speed on it. And taking that feedback back to them may be helpful in engagement on both parts. That's what I would have to say to council.
We can certainly update. That's not a problem. Any really pertinent situations that we run into with this committee, I'll go to the council president at the time and have guidance that way. My vote is not my vote. My vote is the council's vote. And I can't honestly think of one vote in these 2+ years that I've individually voted without the thought of the council or the direction of our leadership.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, one more
Yes,
thing, if
Yes,
you'll
ma'am.
indulge. I really appreciate the comments from my colleague Baker on the diversion center, and would like to see as part of this process, if we can incorporate, and I don't know what this is going to require, an analysis to redo the, we're talking about the Juvenile Old Justice Center, all the costs involved with that. I mean, it's clearly going to exceed building a new diversion center and potentially at this campus. And when we're looking to purchase land or we're looking to build a jail campus, I would like to see part of this analysis include a new structure for a diversion center. And yeah, we can plant trees along a different path to get in if somehow it's psychologically damaging to people being driven there. But, if there's enough space, we could do both. And I'd like to see the same analysis done that was done for JC Justice Center, revamping that and building a new one. Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, what we'll do, we'll get some more information to you so you can peruse it. Again, all the meetings, and I don't anticipate anybody's going to want to go back and listen to the meetings, but they are made available. As Jeff noticed, there's the 300-page document that'll give us direction for the concerns of those that are interested in that avenue. I do understand everybody has different thoughts and different concerns, and ultimately, I think we all share the same concern. And my direction has been get this jail built as best and as quick and as feasible as possible. And we've dealt with some bad things over there, and I think this is a good thing that we're finally getting into to at least get the community back behind us when it concerns the jail itself. The Justice Center is a different story, but we'll make sure that anybody that has concerns has the information that they need. But as we move forward, all the important decisions will be made by the council, and we will determine the direction of not just the jail, but the Justice Center itself. That I can assure you, because that's the way that is. Anything further?
Good job, Mike.
Okay, I know there's a lot of information. There's a lot of good information, some good questions. I know you have more questions. I would anticipate maybe once Jeff gets a little, maybe when we get closer on the property, we can come back and discuss further. I certainly want to bring the architect in to meet everyone and to let us know what their thoughts are and their process as they move forward. And we'll keep you up to date as best we can. Property's important. That's going to be next after this. And I think we're on our way. It's been a long road, but I think we're finally on our way to taking care of a big problem that this county has had for multiple tens of years. So is there any miscellaneous business? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.